A sewing lesson from Sew New York. Today we're going to focus on the French seam. Hi, I'm Laura McCracken and welcome to Sew New York. Last week we learned how to make a crocheted belt loop, and we looked at this cotton voile dress. This is made of a lightweight cotton voile. It has a silk lining. It's a retro dress, butterick pattern. The pattern number is B5707. So this week we're going to look at it again, and we're going to learn how to make the French seam, which is the seam that I used throughout this dress. Okay, so let's go take a look at how to make the French seam. So now we're going to take a look at the French seam, and I have some fabric here that I've pinned so that we can make a French seam. It's 2 layers, a bottom and a top to make a seam. You always put the good side of the fabric together and you pin it, and then you sew on the wrong side. So this is going to be the French seam, and it's the only seam that really is just the opposite. And this is a cotton sateen. As you can see, this is the shiny side, which is the good side, and this is the inside, the wrong side, which is flat and just a basic plain looking cotton. So again, with the French seam, we want to pin the wrong side together. It's a different seam than most. Okay, we're going to pin it together. And I am using white fabric so that you can see the stitches. So the dress is brown and pink polka dot, but I don't want to use that fabric because it won't be as clear to see. So I've pinned the whole seam together. So we have about 10 inches here, and I'm going to sew it up. There are 2 stitch lines that make the seam. So if your seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, which is standard on commercial patterns, you're going to want to make your 2 stitch lines fit within that 5/8 of an inch. So the first stitch line we're going to do is going to be at 3/8 of an inch. Let's go do that first. So now we have our 2 layers of fabric pinned with the wrong sides together, and I'm going to sew it at the machine. Most machines have lines that indicate the seam allowance. This white tape right here is for 5/8. There's a line next to it, that's 1/2 inch, and the line that I have the fabric lined up with is at 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to sew the seam. And we're going to take a few stitches and back tack. Back tacking keeps the seam from coming apart. You back tack at both ends. Do about 3 or 4 stitches and then back tack to the beginning. Okay, and now we're going to sew all the way down to the bottom at the 5/8. And if you're a new sewer, don't just sew over pins. I've been sewing a long time, so it's okay for me to sew pins. You really want to be accurate when you sew, so I can't stress enough. Learn to baste and use a basting stitch. If you become a good sewer and you've been basting, after a while you won't need it, but at least you will know how to baste so that when you are working with delicate fabrics like silk or sewing on velvet, you will baste because you know that that's the proper way to keep a fabric from slipping. So we're going to sew all the way to the bottom, and we're going to back tack and sew right off. And let's take that out. So now we have our first row of stitching at 3/8 of an inch. Okay, I did it in gray thread so that you can see it. Alright, so now we're going to go and we're going to trim the seam. And get ready for that. Okay, we are going to cut the seam allowance to 3/8, and you're going to trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch. You want to trim it nice and narrow, and try and trim it straight, and don't get too close to your stitch line, but a good 1/8 of an inch will be just perfect. Okay, That's what it should look like. You now have about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, let's go press this the proper way before we do our second row of stitching. And now we're going to press our seam. We want to press the stitch line, and we want to try to get your stitch line, the seam, nice and flat. And you're pressing it on the wrong side. The shiny side is on the other side. Beautiful. Okay, so our seam is now pressed nice and flat. The next step in making the French seam is to now pin the stitch line for the second seam. So I've started to pin it down here, and I'm pinning the stitch line so it's nice and flat. I like to put my pins through it in this direction. So we have a couple more pins to put in here. And if you're a new sewer, you're going to pin it and then you're going to baste it. And basting is a temporary seam that you will take out, or I should say, a temporary stitch that you're going to take out when you finish sewing it at the machine. It's a hand stitch basting. And it's an important stitch to learn, so if you don't know it, really find out how to do a basting stitch. I will have a demonstration on that shortly. Okay, so now I've got all of my pins in place. And we can see that the seam, this is the first stitch line, it's pinned nice and flat at the edge. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew it all up, the last seam. This is the last stitch line that we're going to do for the French seam. The French seam consists of 2 stitch lines, and the 2 stitch lines have to equal 5/8 of an inch. So the first stitch line that we did was 3/8, and the second stitch line that we're going to do right now is 1/4 of an inch. And 1/4 of an inch, which is 2/8, and 3/8 equals 5/8. So this is the seam. We're going to stitch it a little bit, back tack again. You don't want your stitches coming out. And let's go all the way down to the bottom. And on this machine, for 1/4 of an inch, the edge of the foot is my guide. On your machine, it might be a line, it might be the edge of your foot, but just make sure you have something to follow so you have a good 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then when you get to the bottom, you're going to back tack. Back tacking's 2 directions, back and then forward. And it's locked in nicely. And when you're done, just cut everything right off at the very edge. You're done with the seam, cut off your threads, and always leave enough thread for the sewing machine. Let's cut the threads at the top. And now let's remove the pins and take a look at the French seam. The French seam is really a beautiful seam, and it's used for sheer fabrics where you don't want to see a big seam underneath. It's used in quality clothing, so often you'll find silk garments, really nice garments made of good fiber are often sewn with the French seam. Let's take a look at the right side of the fabric now. So here we are, and here's the French seam. I'm going to give it a little bit of a press, and then I'm going to come back and show it to you. So you're going to want to just press it nice and flat like you did before. But that's the outside, that's the good side of the garment, and there's the inside. That's your French seam. It's a totally finished seam. It's quite beautiful. Well, the seam is all pressed. Let's take a look at it. So this is cotton sateen, and that seam looks lovely. That's the good side. Let's take a look at the inside, or the back side, where the actual seam is. And that's it. That's it finished. It's lovely. So it's a nice seam because it's completely finished. You have no raw edges. It's small, so if you have sheer fabric, you're not going to see it as much. And it's a nice strong seam. It's good for delicate fabrics. You can use it on any fabric. But quality is often not there in the clothing we buy today. So if you're going to take the time to make clothing, choose seams that are beautiful and make things that are nice to wear. See you soon.